What happens when a single drone strike shut down the last Russian crude artery into the European Union? You don't just lose barrels, you gain leverage. Today's February 23rd, 2026. I'm Justin McShane. Thanks for spending part of your day with us at geopoliticsunplugged.com. Here's your deep dive for the 23rd day of February. This is not just a pipeline story. This is a story about infrastructure being converted into political leverage. You see, on January 27th, a Russian Shahed drone struck Ukraine's Brody pumping station. It was one impact point on one facility, and with that single strike, the southern branch of the Druzhba pipeline went to zero. 27 days later, flows remain offline. Russian Urals crude shipments to Hungary and Slovakia are still at zero. And when 300 to 400,000 barrels per day disappear from landlocked refineries engineered specifically for that crude and that grade, the impact is not theoretical, it's mechanical, it's economic, and now it's political. Let's start with the anatomy of the system. The Druzhba pipeline, which translates oddly enough to friendship in Russian, is not symbolic infrastructure. It's 4,000 kilometers of high-pressure Soviet engineering that has been operational since 1964. The system originates in Russia's Samara region and pulls crude from the Urals and western Siberian fields. The pipeline uses diameters ranging between 500 to 1,020 millimeters, but was built to move heavy, sulfur-rich blends. Urals crude typically carries an API gravity of between 30 and 32 degrees and sulfur content as high as 1.8%. This is not Brent. This is not WTI. This is refinery-specific feedstock. After crossing Belarus and entering Ukraine, the pipeline splits, and the northern branch historically supplied Germany and Poland with up to 1 million barrels per day. The southern branch, which is now offline, diverges at Brody and feeds Hungary, Slovakia, and occasionally the Czech Republic. Before the war, total system throughput averaged between 750 and 800,000 barrels per day. Southern branch flows alone typically range between 300 to 400,000 barrels per day. That volume matters because Hungary's MOL Danube Refinery, with a capacity of 165,000 barrels per day, and Slovakia's Slovnaft Bratislava Refinery, with a capacity of 120,000 barrels per day, are calibrated specifically for Urals crude. They're not optimized for Brent. They're not optimized for U.S. Gulf Coast light sweet. They're optimized for Urals. When you change the feedstock, you do not simply change costs, you change yield. Diesel cracks move, hydrocrackers operate differently, desulfurization units face different stress profiles. This is chemistry. This is not politics. So why was Druzhba still flowing in 2026? Because sanctions are political documents. They're not geological ones. Under EU Regulation 833/2014, seaborne Russian crude imports were banned. Pipeline crude, however, was exempted. In June 2022, Hungary and Slovakia secured a carve-out under the sixth sanction package. Their argument was straightforward. They're landlocked. Their refineries are locked into Russian-grade feedstock. An abrupt switch would result in GDP contraction of 1 to 2%. The exemption remains in place until 2027. That means the southern branch of the Druzhba is the last major sanctioned legal Russian crude artery still feeding the European Union. And that made it uniquely vulnerable because if you cannot sanction away immediately, you can disrupt it. On January 27th, a Shahed drone struck the Brody pumping station. The damage was not superficial. It included high-voltage transformer nodes, SCADA control systems, an automated dispatch equipment, and switching gear that sustained fire damage. Throughput halted instantly. It didn't slow, it didn't taper, it went to zero. Ukraine reports that 50 to 60% of its national power infrastructure has already been damaged by prior Russian strikes. Repairing high voltage equipment in an active war zone is not a routine maintenance event. Replacement components require specialized sourcing and secure installation on ongoing security risk. These are not Amazon Prime deliveries at all. The immediate impact was severe. Hungary lost 60 to 70% of its crude feedstock supply. Slovakia, roughly the same percentage. Under normal conditions, southern branch flows range between 300 to 400,000 barrels per day. On February 18th, Slovakia declared an official oil emergency. It authorized the release of approximately 250,000 tons from its strategic reserves, providing about 90 days of cover at reduced throughput levels. Hungary and Slovakia responded politically. They imposed bans on diesel exports to Ukraine. That action deepened Ukraine's wartime fuel stress, and that is when the leverage conversion began. Let's quantify the stress scenarios. If flows resume within 2 weeks, Brent impact may be limited roughly 50 cents. Regional diesel prices could rise around 3%, and Hungary's GDP impact may be contained to negative about 0.1%. If the outage extends into 60 days, Brent impact could approach $1.75. Diesel prices may raise 8%, and Hungary's GDP impact could deepen towards a negative 0.5%. If there's no restart through the second quarter, Brent could rise approximately $3, and diesel prices could spike 15% regionally, and Hungary's GDP risk could approach negative 1.2%. The inflection point is 60 days. That's when refinery margin stresses begin converting into durable political leverage. Duration converts infrastructure damage into bargaining power. Now consider Russia's position. Russia is estimated to be losing between 50 to 100 million euros per month in revenue from southern branch flows. This is not insignificant, but it's not catastrophic either. Russia has redirected other export volumes elsewhere. The structural reality is this: the longer the Druzhba remains offline, the more stress accumulates within EU cohesion, and Moscow benefits from internal fracture risk more than from marginal revenue loss. The repair dispute has now become political. Ukraine states that repair crews are working and that restoration is ongoing. Hungarian officials argue that Ukraine is deliberately delaying repairs for political leverage. Slovakia has echoed similar claims. Kyiv denies any political motive. Brussels has refused to impose deadlines or to publicly pressure Ukraine. At this point, the issue is no longer simply about transformers and SCADA systems. It's about vetoes and leverage. Hungary has threatened to block a 90 billion euro EU loan package to Ukraine. It has also signaled opposition to the upcoming 20th sanctions package and has previously voted key Ascension-related measures down. Pipeline flows are now part of the bargaining matrix. Energy infrastructure has become diplomatic currency, and everyday flows remain at zero. Hungary's leverage increases. Alternatives do exist, but they're expensive. Croatia's Adria pipeline via the GenF offers capacity between 200 and 300,000 barrels per day. Seaborne Urals deliveries remain legally permissible under the exemption framework. However, transit costs increase between 20 and 30%. That translates into 200 to 300 million euros in annual incremental costs. Refinery retrofits will require multi-year capital programs costing hundreds of millions of euros. This is not flip the switch adjustment at all. When we zoom out, the broader structural issue becomes clear. Druzhba was built to bind Eastern Europe to Moscow's supply system. Today, it survives as a legacy dependency artifact. The European Union has reduced Russian energy imports by roughly 90% since 2022, but this southern branch remains active under exemption. And when it fails, even temporarily, it exposes that the diversification project is incomplete. If the outage is short, the disruption remains tactical. If the outage extends 60 days, stress becomes structural. If the outage extends into the second quarter, Hungary's veto power strengthens. Ukraine's diesel vulnerability intensifies. Russia benefits indirectly from EU fracture risk, and Brussels faces accelerating pressure to force diversification. Duration determines who gains. Markets do not price rhetoric, they price duration. Over the next 90 days, the indicators that matter are not headlines, they are flows and capacity signals. Watch Brody repair progress. Watch Janef booking volumes above 200,000 barrels per day. Watch Slovak reserve draw rates. Watch the Hungarian electricity and gas transit volumes to Ukraine. Watch the timing of the EU sanctions vote. Watch the Brent Urals differential. Watch Central European diesel crack spreads. Political pressure follows marginal pressure. Markets will not price statements. They will price duration. Short outages are margin events. Extended outages become structural supply realignments. If flows restart quickly, the system stabilizes. If not, this episode will mark the moment the southern branch of the Druzhba ceased being merely a pipeline and became an instrument of leverage. And here's the uncomfortable question. If Druzhba resumes tomorrow, does Europe return to its complacency until 2027? Or does this outage accelerate permanent decoupling from Russia? Because the 2027 exemption expiration is coming regardless. And every month, an outage compresses that timeline psychologically. So let me ask you this. If Druzhba stays offline through the second quarter, does Hungary blink first? Or does Brussels? Let me know in the comments. And that's your deep dive for today. You can read the full long deep dive with lots of information at geopoliticsunplugged.com. 16,000 people read it every single time it publishes, and you should too. We do this every morning with the Rapid Read News Summary. Click subscribe to stay in the know. And I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.